So Mimi has started the recording, and I just wanted to ask people, it sounds like whoever had some noise in the background has muted themselves, so thank you for doing that. The last time I looked, I did not see Gerry O'Brien on the call yet. I do see Emily Cureton Cook, so welcome, Emily, and we should be starting in just a minute as soon as Gerry signs on. And thank you, Carol, for doing the nice introduction of Joette. And you also have already pointed us to this month's issue of Echoes, which includes extensive information about Joette. Carol had mentioned that Joette has a background in journalism, has worked with the Chicago Tribune for several years early in her career, then moved to Anchorage, Alaska, and worked in public relations for about 33 years. So she has an amazing background. So we're really happy that she could facilitate today's meeting, and that she's also a member of the League of Women Voters of Deschutes County. And I see that Gerry O'Brien is now on the call. Welcome, Gerry. And I am turning the meeting over to our facilitator, Joette Storm, who will in turn introduce both Gerry O'Brien and Emily Cureton Cook.
Well, thank you, Karen, and welcome, Emily and Gerry. Nice to see you, even if it's only on Zoom. We had hoped to be in person this month. So both of our speakers are journalists. They come to us with an extensive background. Gerry was most recently at the Klamath newspapers, which are also part of EO Media, and Emily worked in Texas and Georgia and also in Crescent City. So they have some variety of backgrounds. We are very fortunate to have local media in Central Oregon because, as many of you know, newspapers are being brought up. The Chicago Tribune is owned by an investment corporation now, and the folks working there are not very happy. And lots of radio stations are part of big conglomerates like Sinclair. So we're happy to have local representation. The Bulletin is one of 16 publications operated by EO Media, a family-owned Oregon corporation serving the Pacific Northwest. And it's committed to reporting and distributing local news and information. Oregon Public Broadcasting is the primary public television and radio network in our state, and for covering parts of southern Washington. OPB consists of 20 radio stations. It carries programs from Public Broadcasting Station and National Public Radio and some other entities. We get a little bit. So today we're going to ask you to give us a general background on your organization's philosophy of covering the news. And then I think there are going to be plenty of questions from this group. So Emily, may I ask you to start by telling us the general policy of OPB and how it guides your work in covering Central Oregon?
Yeah, thank you, Joette. I'm happy to be here. So, first of all, I'm OPB Central Oregon Bureau Chief. And that means I've reported and produced stories out of Bend, Central Oregon, more broadly, and Eastern Oregon for the last 3.5 years. Most of OPB's reporters and our editorial staffs are based in Portland, though we also have a bureau in Southwest Washington and Vancouver. So our editorial philosophy, that's kind of a big question, in terms of how you're approaching it as a reporter versus how you're approaching it for an editor. I wear both hats at the organization, and I can speak first, I guess, to our goals. Our biggest goal is to be the most trusted statewide news source in Oregon, and to do that by providing not only information that is factual and that people need to know, but also by telling stories that are compelling and authentic and often moving. And so those two things can actually be a little bit of a tension and a little bit to juggle in news, because just the facts and just the information, it's not necessarily at odds with the emotion that is inherent in storytelling, but it requires a lot of judgment, a lot of fact checking, a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that hopefully you as an audience member aren't experiencing when you get to lose yourself in that OPB story, when you hear something on the radio that, you know, makes you sit in your car extra time in your driveway, or when you're watching Oregon Field Guide and you're transported to a new place. So our philosophy is really to put story first while upholding those journalism ethics that make OPB a really trusted and important news source. And I have tons to say, but I don't want to suck up all the air while Gerry's right there.
All right, well, that's a good segue then. We'll ask you, Gerry, to do a similar thing.
I'll second that for Emily. Yeah, so we're owned by EO Media Group, and that is the folks, it's a family-owned operation based in Astoria, in Pendleton, and in Salem. Their home office is actually in Salem. We have about 15 newspapers across the state. Some are daily, some are weekly, some are 2 or 3 times a week, you know, depending on the audience. Our goal, of course, is to cover local news first, and we do get criticized for that, especially, you know, with the war in Ukraine. We're hearing a lot about how come Ukraine isn't on the front page of our newspaper, and you know, every day. And usually, it's because we're trying to cover local news. That's our bread and butter. We want to be a newspaper of record, though of course that's difficult to do these days because of staffing issues and the amount of news that you have to cover. We do cover the Tri-County area, which includes Deschutes County, our base. And we have about, I'd say, 50 people that work for the Bulletin here in town, from advertising to newsroom to distribution, ad building, and things like that. So we also want to write stories that have context in them, not just being the ambulance chasers that happen when there's a fire that burns down a mobile home or something like that. We want to have stories that actually affect people and affect change. A good example of that was the homeless story we did on a homeless student here last Sunday, and really got lots of response to that. And as it turns out, there's some funding that's been set up to help him out and help out students that come behind him as far as need goes at COCC. So that's kind of the kind of thing we'd like to do too as well. So with that, I'll leave it open.
Okay, well, the very most popular question is, how do you determine what to cover? So I would ask you, Emily, do you get direction from OPB or NPR on what to cover?
I always get that question. For the most part, no. I think as actually a foundational understanding, it might be good to explain the relationship between OPB and NPR, and the relationship between OPB and our audience a little bit better. We're what's called an NPR member station, which means we're part of this really unique collaboration with National Public Radio. So the way it works is that we carry programs that are produced by NPR, a national outlet, and OPB actually pays NPR for those programs that you hear, like Morning Edition and All Things Considered, the kind of flagship ways that a lot of people start or end their work days. And within those programs, there are holes. We call it, like, it's like a clock, and there'll be a hole or an opportunity for local member stations like OPB to put their own announcers on the air seamlessly with the people who are part of the national program, and put our own news stories in those holes. And so that is kind of what the listener hears on a day-to-day, and why NPR sort of sounds cohesive across the country, while you have these pops of highly local, individualized reporting to the place where you're at. And it's a very unique collaboration to kind of bring local and national news together in one place for folks. When I do stories for NPR, they do, to your original question, sometimes request a story from our neck of the woods. Most of the time it's me going to NPR and saying, hey guys, like, this is really important. It's happening in Central Oregon, but here's why it's important to a national audience. Will you carry it so that people in Milwaukee, you know, or DC or wherever can hear the stuff that people at OPB listeners are hearing? And then the NPR editor, there's one for like 8 states or something. There's, you know, these bureau chiefs that are responsible for big areas, and they green light or say no, but usually they say yes if it's a good idea. And they actually pay me and OPB to carry that story to national audiences. So that's kind of covering a little bit of the transactional side of it. In terms of the editorial side, how I choose what I'm going to cover, for the most part, that is actually a big part of my job, and one of the more difficult parts. I mean, of course, the actual reporting process is very difficult. But why OPB pays me those solid middle class wages is that judgment of deciding, especially working kind of in an ecosystem where the Bulletin is providing beat reporting, it is doing the work and serving this community with local news in a way that like other communities don't necessarily get the benefit of. In some ways I focus less on Bend because the Bulletin does a good job, and there are other communities all around us where there are not the resources. So you'll see me out on the road a lot, out in Eastern Oregon, making a calculation of, is this really important to Oregonians? Does it say something that we need to know, and that if people knew about, they might actually change and could improve people's lives? And is no one else going to cover it? So for the last 3.5 years, that's been a big part of my calculation, in addition to accountability within Bend, and kind of having that push-pull of being a healthy, like, not competitor, but like a healthy force within the local press corps to kind of push government to be as transparent and as good as they can be, while straying further afield and covering these areas that aren't necessarily going to get the attention. And I think actually my calculation is going to change a bit very soon, because we're in the process of hiring 2 new reporters who will both be east of the Cascades, a new person here in Bend with me, and another person who will be covering rural communities, specifically in Eastern Oregon. So that's going to be a big game changer for OPB's coverage in Central and Eastern Oregon. And we're really excited to have those folks online probably in the next month or 2.
Gosh, well, that is exciting. Thank you. So Gerry, the same question for you, I guess. First, does EO Media give you direction, and also how you use the Community Advisory Board?
Sure. And I have to say that OPB is great news listening. I listen to it every morning. I love the format where you have top of the hour national, international news, and then you have Oregon news, and then it goes down to local news. And that's great. For us, we don't get a lot of top-down direction to say what to cover from EO Media Group per se. Like I said, we have about 9 to 10 papers that are kind of stretched across the northern tier of Oregon, and they all cover their communities really well. And we share all that information when we can. But for us, it's really kind of Bend-centric to start with. All our reporters have assigned beats, such as police and school board, health beats, business, things like that. And those reporters, because they're working the beats and they know who the sources are, and they kind of get a feel for what's going on in the community that way, and they do it every day, and they become trusted as reporters, they develop their stories. They bring them to our city desk, and we get some of the stories too from folks in town that want to read about something that's of import. And we kind of hashed out on Slack. I think you guys know what Slack is, kind of an instant messaging program. And because of COVID, we're not all in the building yet together. So there's this wonderful chatter that goes back and forth about, hey, I've got this story going on today in court. What do you think about this? And we say, does it have a photo? Can we assign that? We talk all about all those little pieces that have to come together later on in the day. But it's almost like a real newsroom, in that the chatter is open and down to earth, but at the same time we're all working remotely too. But it has worked pretty well. Editorially, though, we decide a lot of the editorials ourselves. We have a community editorial board that we try to meet twice a month, and we usually bring in a speaker to talk about a certain issue that's kind of a hot button topic, and then we'll decide what kind of editorial to write from that input and from the editorial board. Our CEO, who is Steve Forrester, does from time to time say, hey, you should take a look at this for an editorial, because it worked well up in Astoria or something like that. But generally, it's kind of a hands-off thing, which, it's hard to direct local news coverage from afar. It just really is. And so you have to trust the people on the ground that are doing it. So it's a lot of fun. It's to me, it's one of these newspapers that I haven't worked for, I haven't seen in a while. A lot of newsrooms have been cut to the bone, and this one is really getting a lot of support. I mean, we have 6 reporters, and everybody works very hard and diligently, and we cover the news at least 6 days a week. We have somebody on staff, so it's kind of a little bit of a retro to the old days when newsrooms were really busy like that. So it's very refreshing to be working in a newsroom like that here.
So no typewriter clacking in the background. What about the Redmond Spokesman? Do you share the same staff with that paper?
We do. The Spokesman is, we have some news about that as well. Spokesman's our weekly paper in Redmond, and we lost some staffers early on. I've been here about 2.5 years, and about 6 months into it, we lost our main editor reporter for down there. So we've been kind of just limping along, trying to get the Spokesman to stay above water. But Redmond is a key place for us for readership. And, we have a lot of Ben readers, of course, the Bulletin readers that get the paper daily. But there's another group of people that just like the Redmond Spokesman and kind of just want to see it as a weekly. It comes out on Wednesdays. We are hiring a new editor for that position. We actually have hired a new editor, starts next week. And we are going to kind of revive the Spokesman to make it a true community newspaper that's focused on Redmond itself. And that's something we haven't done for quite a while. And it shows in the revenues in the paper and just the size of it, all that kind of stuff. It's rare these days that you actually try to launch a newspaper and try to grow a hard copy newspaper that's home delivered. But at the same time, we're going to be pushing a lot on our digital side, which is what we do for the Bulletin as well. So it's very exciting, and we hope to grow that quickly.
Thank you. Well, we have one question already, and I'm going to start with it. I'm trying to see who it's from. It says, I really appreciate recent coverage of the Bulletin on houselessness. Do you plan to have any coverage on the chronology of this issue and how it has intensified over the last several decades? For those who grew up here, we saw little evidence of houselessness, though it existed even then. It has changed from the 80s through the present. Will you be covering how it has evolved and gotten worse?
That's a really good question, and that's a great idea, and I think we're going to do that. We have not thought about that. We're doing profiles of the homeless right now every 2 weeks, and we're going to wrap that up at the end of the year or so with a large publication. But I've always kind of thought that homelessness really started back during the Reagan administration, when a lot of the institutions that were there were shut down by the federal government, and people got turned out on the street. And that's, to me, and this just might be my opinion, but it's kind of, that's where it started. And it's been going on slowly for years and building, and it's just kind of hitting its peak here. So, but that's a great idea to look at it historically, how that came about. And that might help in solving the problem too. So, yes.
All right, now, well, here's another one that came up. It was interesting this morning, and I think this might be more for Emily. Do your reporters, are they experiencing hostility from the public these days?
I think I saw the question pop up, and didn't the person say while conducting interviews?
Mm-hmm.
I make that distinction because, generally while conducting interviews and kind of sourcing and building the intelligence, the collective intelligence that is required to cover any beat, especially OPB's beats tend to be very topical. Like we have a health reporter and a policing reporter, and then these regional desks where it's kind of like the taco salad of all the beats in one place. When you're doing that kind of work, it requires building relationships and getting to know people. And no, people are not hostile to me or to my reporters when we're conducting interviews, because typically in that space, even when it's an interview that someone's not expecting, like if I'm calling someone who is a subject of accountability in a report and they don't know that I'm necessarily coming, and I'm, might catch them off guard, even then, I still think that civility reigns to a great extent, and people are decent, and the way that we're able to communicate in real time and talk to people on the phone, very rarely I'm communicating something for my job and why a topic is important because of my job, and people typically respect that, even if they don't think it's an important topic. They don't tend to personally attack me in real time while conducting an interview. Where you see hostility is in the growth of virtual spaces, social media. Basically just social media as a toxic cesspool, which is a shame because it's a great place to make community connections. It's a great place to find sources and story ideas and to know what's going on in real time. I mean, if you've ever watched a world event unfold on Twitter with what's called the geofence, where you can wrangle all the accounts in one area where something important is happening, it's this amazingly democratic experience of news. On the other hand, if I could just make it so that I don't get messages that contain like the C word, the B word, or like various slurs for women, like that would make my life so much better. But people don't say that stuff to me in an interview. They don't have the courage to say that to my face. They're doing it online. And so that's kind of its own problem. I think part of the beauty of doing local news is that we often do exist in real spaces, in real grocery stores, in real high school football games with people, where we're reminded why the rules of engagement exist and why we don't talk to each other like that.
Well, I've noticed the Bulletin you publish kind of rules of engagement for online. You have that little section about how to do the online comments.
Sure. Yeah, we want people to be civil online when they talk and when they leave comments. We still do allow anonymous comments on our website, which generally it's been okay. It's really toned down from what it used to be. But we do have those kinds of rules of engagement, and if they violate them, we can turn them off as well. But since going to Facebook, and where people have to have a true email address and they have to have their name out there, the civil discourse has gotten better. And out in the public, we really haven't been harassed much locally. Again, same thing that Emily's talking about. Really, there's some trust there. Some of the rallies that have been happening downtown regarding the Barry Washington shooting, those have been tense. And it's usually people don't know who you are, that you might get some pushback. But once they talk to you for a little bit, things do tend to calm down. So. But yeah, I think even when there was the staged stopping of the ICE buses from leaving downtown a couple of years ago, our photographer said he was pretty nervous about that because he was shooting pictures and people were kind of coming up to him and wanting him to get rid of his camera, to not show some of the things that were going on down there, some of the vandalism and things like that. And it's pretty minor stuff, but he was nervous. He said there was a big crowd around him, and trying to do your job that way makes it a little tough. So, but overall, yeah, it's been pretty nice working with folks.
That's reassuring. Mimi has a question. How are both your organizations responding to the immense responsibility the press has in protecting and supporting our fragile democracy? Which of you wants to take that?
I'm smiling because in journalism, like that sounds so heavy, but it's actually just like Tuesday for journalists. I think we tend to be a pretty idealistic crowd, and nobody gets into this for the money. So in terms of handling the responsibility, I know I'm sort of at a low point in terms of feeling like that idealism and the kind of the convictions that I have in, if you give people information and it's accurate and you're diligent about it, and of course you're not going to be perfect, there will be mistakes, but there will never ever be an intentional effort to mislead people, that basically like that will create an informed society and a kind of inexorable march towards justice. And I think the role of misinformation and kind of just this wave of misinformation interplaying with mass information on social media, and like a little bit less literacy maybe from audiences about what is and isn't trustworthy, definitely wears on you when you put your heart into your work and you think, okay, like I've kept my end of the bargain, people. Like, so in some ways, working for a place like OPB, or I would imagine working for the Bulletin, I think we'll get through this time and have a lot more resiliency maybe than places that don't have as healthy of a culture and as healthy of an audience support. I mean, we saw the Bulletin basically be saved by the town recently, and OPB listeners are fiercely supportive and loyal. So without that, I honestly don't know that I would still be wanting to do this work, but knowing that I live in a smaller community and that people really value what we're doing makes it possible.
Yeah, I really think that issue is a lot greater on a national level than it is on a local level.
Mhm.
At the same time, we get telephone calls, or we get emails, or we get letters to the editor that are just diametrically opposed to what was printed in our opinion pages, and people are, you can tell they're angry. And sometimes it's just hard to, when you're on the phone, it's hard to interrupt someone who is just cannot get the words out how angry they are about an editorial that we posted in the paper that may be favoring one side or the other. Nonetheless, I always invite people, if you're having a strong opinion like that, please write back to us. And I think generally what the issue is, people want to be heard. They just, they feel like Bend has changed so much from kind of a conservative community to more liberal, progressive community, and the conservative voices aren't being heard as much or as well, and they're not being reported in the paper and things like that. And we offer to talk to those people all the time if they want. But really, the way you kind of calm that situation down is just by engaging those folks and listening to them, hearing their concerns. We got a local columnist wrote a letter the other day that was that really attacked the Democratic Party and some of the things that they're trying to call them out. And what we do is we fact checked everything in that editorial, and it was correct. And so people were kind of surprised that we had run that in the paper. They thought we were a more progressive newspaper, but the editorial page to me is wide open. We want to have people be able to have their say, as long as it's fact checked and they're not really attacking anybody's kind of background or anything like that. So it's an interesting time, interesting businesses, but I think democracy is still being well served, and we'll get through this.
Thank you. The next question had to deal with finances, and Molly is remembering that the Bulletin was assisted by some local investors, and says, as you transition from a paper, hard copy paper to digital, how has the economic situation changed? And I think there'd be a similar question for OPB in terms of donor expectations. But Gerry, can you answer that? Are you going to digital more and more?
Yeah, there's a couple things there. When I first got here 2.5 years ago, we just bought the paper out of bankruptcy. We had investors, about 6 investors. They contributed quite a bit of money to get us over the top so that we could win that bankruptcy auction from Adams Media Group. And within 2 years, we have been able to pay them all back. So that shows that the community is really behind us for the investment, which was great. I mean, that just kind of launched us and saved our bacon. And we were able to move fast enough and use our costs and pay back the investors so that now we're in the clear of that. And some of the investors have actually turned back the money, and they just said, well, invest in journalists some more, whatever you can do. So we're going to be doing that as well. So our finances look really good. The trend you'll see in newspapers across the country is where the revenue really is growing is digital subscribers, and those are folks that are not getting the hard copy delivered on their front door. They're They're getting it online, and they're getting e-editions, electronic editions, or other social media platforms. And that really is, aside from circulation, it used to be circulation and ROP advertising in the papers. Those were the big dogs that brought in the revenue. Now it's switched to digital subscribers. They don't have to pay as much to get the paper, but the more you get, the more you can get them to sign up and subscribe, the better off you are. And our focus is really to grow our digital subscribers by so much that it help or totally fund the newsroom operation, and we can grow our newsroom. So the focus now is really on the newsroom, and it's focused on our readers. And what's nice about the internet is you can connect with your readers in so many different ways. You kind of have a good feel about what your readership is and what they want. So we're doing lots of things that way now. So that's helping us. Looks pretty bright for the future.
Yeah. Well, Emily, everyone knows that OPB survives on donors, members that pay. But there's always the question of how influential, particularly the big donors, somebody like Nike or an oil company, how they influence your coverage. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I don't have any influence from donors or, wealthy interests who support OPB. In fact, I have some numbers in front of me here because I always get asked this because, we call ourselves public media. So there's a little bit of a baked in misperception that we get a lot of public funding, for instance. That's actually more the question I get in rural communities, is if the government supports us. Versus the truth of it is that these smaller sustaining individual members are our bread and butter, and kind of allow the organization to be really financially resilient, because we don't it doesn't matter if one person pulls their money from OPB when we have so many smaller donors. So your original question, though, I mean, it's an interesting one, because certainly people have tried or contact me, but that's sort of why OPB likes to hire prickly journalists. I mean, I probably don't see prickly, but if you try to get me to do a story because you gave money to OPB, you'll meet a different side of my personality. And I certainly never get pressure, from above, other than I always want anyone with a story idea to contact me. I mean, my cell phone is like, I shout it from the rooftops, like call me, text me, email me. People are welcome to harangue me with their story ideas. I have had people who will like pitch me, something that for whatever reason, there's a long calculus of why a single bureau reporter who's, doing statewide news might not pick up on your story idea at that moment, why I might flag it in a folder for later, or why I might say, hey, the Bulletin's got a beat reporter I bet would really like that story. Or, I'm working on something else at that time, and so I might not get to it. So anyway, there's a long calculation, and I do try to communicate with people who pitch me, here's why I may or may not act on this story. And it has happened on occasion where someone will like find my boss's boss's boss, and try to shake them down. And that doesn't go well for them either. I mean, it's just not, it's not what we do. And I think our major donors and supporters understand that, because the mission and the ethos and the idealism of OPB is like front and center in the way that we communicate with our donors. Just for people who are curious about our funding, it's a very different model than newspapers, and those donations that you hear us soliciting on the air and shaking you down for during pledge drives, they really do make a huge difference. 65 to 70% of OPB's funding, this is organization-wide, news, educational programming, television, 65 to 70% of our funding comes from individuals. And that includes members, the smaller donations, and the major donors that you're asking about. 10 to 15% comes from sponsorships, corporate sponsorships. I say 10 to 15 because in 2020 it was 15, and now I'm not exactly sure, but it's probably more like 10, because we did see a drop in that revenue during the recession and with the COVID restrictions. And then right around 9 to 10% comes from government sources. And that's mostly the federal government through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, an act that largely supports educational programming. I don't have the granular stuff in front of me, but I do sort of, when people think of public money funding the news operations at OPB. It's really, it's really not like that. That CPB money is think of it as the big bird money, and the educational programs and some of the flagship things that people associate with public media and education. And the other 11% comes from a variety of sources. We have an endowment, we have some grants, and we have a little bit of earned revenue from different programs.
Okay, well, as you can both imagine, our members are very interested in legislation and legislators. And one of the areas they would like to see covered is the voting records of the congressional delegation, particularly Representative Bentz, since he has a huge part of this area. How practical is, or what are the challenges you face in covering our representatives?
And I know we've received some heat over not adequately reporting Cliff Bentz's vote, I think, on the transportation bill. But one of the reasons we had not done that was it was pretty much a party line vote. And since Representative Bentz is a freshman in the House, he really doesn't have a lot of power yet. And he pretty much goes along with the party line as it is. Now, that being said, we should point that out a lot more than we have in the past, I think. And our political reporter, Gary Warner, who's up at the state capitol, would love to get going a blog or a service. You know, there used to be a service called Roll Call that would give you all the votes from all the representatives. And now that I think of it, we talked about this in the past. Maybe we talked about it with you folks just a while ago. That we want to get that service back in the paper and back online, so people know what votes they're casting and how they're voting. And then further, Cliff Bentz will no longer be our representative here in this area after the next election because of the change in the congressional districts. Congressional District 5 will be right now Democrat Chris Schrader will have that, but he's up for re-election too, so we may have a change in who that person is. But that being said, yes, coverage of the votes and what the congressional leaders are doing is really important. It is a lot more difficult in that we are so focused on the local or the state, especially when the legislature is meeting, that it's tough to kind of focus on that national level. But we try to do the best we can, and we do partner with other papers and companies that do help us with that coverage.
Emily, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this question points to a place where we should strengthen our coverage, and comments like that are always welcome. And the more, especially I get them, or my editors and the staff at OPB gets them, the more we know what our listeners want. It really is a resources question, and hopefully, with more folks on the ground in Central Oregon, we'll have more time to monitor Congress, and particularly the significance of the 5th district and now being part of the 6th district, just the kind of the changing dynamics due to redistricting will have make that a priority. So yeah, I agree that is important, and also agree with Gerry's assessment that you sort of have to pick and choose sometimes according to your resources and according to the news value of, like, is this vote, something that someone could see in the congressional record with all the other Republicans voting, or does it say something about how this person is representing Oregon's interests specifically? So those are the stories with Congress that I've tried to hone in on, in terms of certifying the Electoral College results and some of the issues as we saw Rep. Bentz move into his role, coming, on the heels of such a veteran congressman. But all that is to say, yes, great story idea, and we would love to do more of that, and would like to, as we get more resources, to kind of balance that. What's locally important, what's a statewide issue? Like right now, I've been working on a long series, too long, that's very statewide. It's very like for Oregonians. Versus, trying to figure out what's going on with Congress. Another issue with Congress, you can see the votes, but a lot of the records laws that I would use to keep up with other officials and the relationships are kind of a black box if someone is in DC a lot of the year. And OPB has long had an ambition to base a reporter in DC, and it just hasn't come to fruition yet. We actually were really close, and then the pandemic hit and things kind of got reshelved, resorted in terms of priorities. But so some of the barriers, they're not excuses, but some of the barriers are, we can't make a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request for Rep. Bence's communications. And we don't have access to a lot of the relationships in DC the way that we do in Salem.
No, I think that's interesting. Things have changed. Alaska Public Radio Network had someone stationed in Washington for years and years. I don't know if they still do, but it was a lifeline for them to be able to. So, and again, for both of you, there is so much emphasis on diversity and equity and inclusion these days. Recently, and I have to thank the Bulletin for meeting with the neighborhood associations and agreeing to print more opinion pieces from the neighborhoods so we could share the issues. And this is one of the concerns of the neighborhood associations, is how do we welcome more diverse members to our boards? And of course, anyone who lives in Bend is automatically a member of a neighborhood association, but do they feel welcome? And I actually provided a Spanish translation of a piece to Richard Coe some weeks ago, hoping that if you couldn't print the whole thing, it at least would appear in the digital version. So are you considering incorporating any kind of bilingual coverage in the Bulletin and also on local radio? That's a pretty big question, but how are you approaching that issue?
My answer is yes. Yeah, at other places I've worked at, we had a Spanish version of our website available to the Latino community. And I think I've been asked this before, and again, we haven't gotten to it here in Bend, but we need to get to that. That's very important to us. And the coverage of diverse populations is top of mind. I think you're seeing a lot more awareness of it, which is good. And I think that we actually had just hired a reporter who is bilingual, and that has already helped us immediately in some of his coverage. So you'll probably see more of that in the future. And again, yeah, a bilingual newspaper that's a dream of mine to try to get something like that started.
Emily, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about OPB's commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion. 3 years or so ago, the organization launched a long kind of overdue concentrated effort to tackle both internal and external issues with who are we hearing from in storytelling? Who are we hiring? What kind of experiences are people having at our organization? Are people of color having radically different experiences when they work for OPB versus white people? And then what is our new, are we serving these audiences that are not, that might not be white or might not be affluent, might not be college educated, kind of the stereotypical public radio listener that you would imagine. So 3 years ago, OPB launched its equity team. I'm on it now. Different folks across the organization served 2-year stints to kind of tackle some of the bigger, thornier issues and really challenge senior leadership is a big part of it. I mean, I think a mark for all of the flaws that would be baked into a system that has excluded certain kinds of voices or did have an overwhelmingly white staff for a long time. For all those problems, the organization's been really receptive to critique and to the learning journey of, it sounds really kind of cheesy and kumbaya, but it is a journey. It's not just about calling out and saying, this is wrong, how dare ye? Like, it's more about, okay, like this is something that we want to change and we want to evolve and we want to fix and we want to admit when we have failed in the past and figure out how to move forward. So that has been a big part of the work that's been going on that coincides with my time at OPB. having this committee, there was a big survey of our staff to identify some key issues, assess pay equity that's happening right now, a more transparent sort of strategy. And that's kind of the internal workings of the organization that you don't see. Externally, we've been very diligent about auditing our sources, and there has been some production of articles in Spanish that's not terribly widespread at this point. We have a review process for stories that deal with racism, white supremacy, or other kind of issues that have been historically kind of misreported or false, like both sides, to kind of review that. An example would be like, I did a story about a local antique mall, or it was really about a young girl's experience of a local antique mall selling Nazi and racist propaganda kind of all mixed up together, and sort of what the context was in the store versus what the context was for this young woman experiencing it. And we had our committee review that, because it's like, we didn't want to put pictures of swastikas on our website. We don't want to put pictures of blackface dolls on our website, even though, like, I think 10 years ago, we would have just been like, this is the news. I mean, I actually recoiled against that. I was like, if it's a thing, you have to show it, you know? And I had a learning experience of being like, the story is kind of about why those items are propaganda and not just kitsch, or whatever history, as people would kind of frame them. And so I had a learning process of like, yeah, I don't want to spread propaganda through this storytelling. That's a super specific example. I mean, I think a big phrase I could use right now that's happened in the last even 2 years at OPB is at the highest level, the organization is committed to being an anti-racist organization, which means that we intentionally do frame a lot of the isms and unfairness and inequities in society through the lens of racial justice. And it's not just to like exhaust you. It's because the premise is that through systemic racism, all these other things have been allowed to foment and exist. And so that has been an interesting journey for me as a journalist, where when I started, we wouldn't necessarily have called something racist the same way you wouldn't necessarily have called someone a liar. I mean, I think liar is still a bit more fraught. And we still don't call people that, but in terms of naming something what it is, like an idea, a behavior, or a systemic, a system that's perpetuating racism, we do own that in a way that has really kind of turned a corner. We don't both sides stories about racism, even though we have to actually still show how these things exist. And I know that this has facilitated really uncomfortable conversations in my own household. You know, like my husband always wants me to define racism for him when I'm talking about it in a story. So that has been a journey, you know, living in especially such a majority white community, where it's an uncomfortable topic that a lot of people have the luxury of not talking about. We have sort of tried to bring it to the fore and embrace the uncomfortableness, and hope that it, the way that I've been able to grow by addressing it, that we kind of facilitate that growth community-wide.
Thank you. That is very interesting. We have a very long question for you. I'm going to let you read that and have Gerry talk about the paywall on the digital version.
Okay, while Emily reads that question, good luck with that too, Emily. Yeah, so we have a paywall that's kind of a you get 2 free reads of our paywall. Again, this is the push to grow our digital subscribers as much as possible. So anybody gets 2 free reads of our paywall per month. If they registered to us, and that's registering means you just sign up with your email address so we can contact you in the future. If you register with us, there's 3 more stories that you can read per month. The idea is with that, we try to convince you to subscribe to our paper as well. So 5 free reads a month, but then after that, we'd ask you to subscribe, and we really hope that you will. And what's nice about that is it's not as expensive as getting a home delivery paper, but you can also get, this is a sales pitch, you can get the Sunday paper delivered free to your home if you subscribe for the digital side of it. So there's a nice little benefit there for that. So that's what that's about.
All right, thanks. So Emily, this is questioning the source of an NPR story. And so that did not originate here in Oregon, but probably in NPR's office somewhere else. But the source was the National Association of Home Builders. So now they are asking, how are you going to contextualize that?
Yeah, I wonder if this question might actually be citing an NPR story, but asking if the Bulletin is planning to include in the series on people who are houseless. Because as far as I know, I mean, we do. Yeah, the question is to Gerry, so I am off the hot seat.
I'm sorry, what?
Wait a minute. But when she said NPR, well, the last part of the question, let's see, I can't tell who asked that question.
The First Thursday coordinator, Carol, right? Or no? But I can buy Gerry some time while he reads it, because I think it's it's the kind of question that we love to get in our news inboxes and emailed to us, of like, a reader is engaging with this series and sees a national context that the reporter may or may not have been aware of. So, I mean, kudos for bringing that up. I don't know that the editor would be able to answer that on the fly, unless it just happens to be a story that they just worked on today. But
I don't think
but I know that I love getting feedback like that on my stories, where somebody is connecting the dots and seeing how our local environment connects with the bigger picture.
Yes, I'll have to plead the fifth on that one until I can delve into it a little bit deeper. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, it's a very lengthy question, and until I got to the bottom, I didn't realize.
Yeah, Gerry, just to simplify the question, I'll go ahead and ask it myself, Joette, is just to see if you are planning on including some of the larger context. I know you're really trying to include specific issues related to people who are houseless in Central Oregon, and you've really looked at issues beyond substance use and mental illness, but I was wondering if you're also planning on looking at the broader systems issues.
Yeah, I would say that at this point, no, but again, that's a great suggestion. That's something we can take on that probably would help us. You know, if you look at the history of homelessness, and then you look at some of the systematic things, you know, with Nick Kristof announcing his run for governor, I started reading some of his books, and I thought, you know, well, this is a reason why some of these things happen, because of the systems. It's not the people that are causing it, it's the people who are affected by these systems. So that would be a nice step up for us in our coverage, to look at that as well on a bigger, broader scale. So yes, thank you for that. We will look at that.
Okay, well, I think we're ready to wrap up, but one thing, if any of our members were interested in serving on your community advisory board, how do you select them, and are there any terms coming up in the near future?
The community board, yeah, they usually stick for about a year, and we try to stagger them so that they go off at different times. So somebody new coming on can actually learn from some of the folks that are on there. So we don't have any openings quite yet, but if you email me your interest, we usually announce it in the paper that we have an opening, and then we get lots of resumes from folks. The last time we did this, I think we got 40 to 60 requests to be on the board, which is just wonderful to see that participation of the community. And like I said, we meet twice a month. Unfortunately, it's by Zoom right now, but it's very lively debate about a whole host of things. So just email me your interest, and we'll keep you on the list.
I don't see any other questions. I would give you both an opportunity to make a concluding statement. And we certainly want to thank you for your time. This was a fabulous opportunity to peek inside the world of journalism. Any final remarks?
Yeah, thank you so much for moderating, Joette, and thank you everyone for being here and engaging. This is such a kind of a boost. Especially, I'm actually isolating right now because of a COVID exposure. So, you know, this is such a great chance to kind of connect with folks who value the service we provide, and also just reiterate that, you know, if you have a story idea, if you have a question, a complaint, whatever it is, you're welcome to contact me. Even as we kind of linger in this virtual world, my inbox is always open, and I look forward to doing more in-person events as they return. We're long overdue for a listening session with Central Oregon, and hope to make that happen soon. So yeah, thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, and I do thank you so much for hosting this small forum. The League of Women Voters is one of my favorite groups. We are hopefully going to pull off a governor's debate here in April and early May if we can, and we want to work with the League, as well as we're working with Pamphlet Media and local TV station to kind of have a live debate of Democratic candidates and GOP candidates, hopefully Sun River. So there'll be more information about that in the near future. Yeah, I just love the community support here. It's wonderful. The paper, everybody feels so relieved that the paper has kind of come out of the little bit of the dark ages and now has strong community support. So thank you all for being part of that. And as always, contact us if you have any issues or any story ideas that you'd like to see in our newspaper. That'd be great. Thank you once again.
All right, well, I'll turn it back to Karen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joette. And I would like to reiterate Joette's thanks to both Emily and Gerry. This has actually been our most well-attended presentation of the year. So obviously there's a high value of the importance of the press and a robust press in sustaining a democracy. And we really appreciate your coverage of Central Oregon and really illuminating these issues for us, because there are so many of us who are new to Central Oregon. So thank you again for your time. For those of you who plan to attend next month, our speaker will be Jackie Dingfelder, who is the executive director of the Board of Climate Solutions, and she's also a former state legislator, and she is a member of the League of Women Voters of Deschutes County. Thank you all for attending. And thank you